Perfect. Well, hi, everybody. I'm excited to be here with you all. We are hosting this for Big Thicket National Preserve. So our third Thursdays at 3 Eastern time. So we're excited. I'm excited to highlight Big Thicket. A couple of years ago, our first Partners in the Parks project came to Texas to Big Bend. And we had a wonderful winter trip with some students. Obviously, Texas in the summertime is a little hot, so we decided to do a winter project, which was beautiful. It was interesting because it was during the government shutdown. So instead of actually being able to stay in the national park, we had a quick change about 2 weeks before the trip where we ended up going to a state park. And as we all know, Bill Atwill would say, the fun begins when the plans go awry. So it did indeed become a fun trip. We actually had some students who gave feedback at the end of the trip that because of where we were situated, being at Davis Mountain State Park, and Big Bend is further south than that, we did quite a bit more driving than we originally planned. But we had some really good feedback from students that they enjoyed the driving time because it gave them a chance to get to know each other more. And it was even more of a relaxing trip because they didn't have to walk as far. But also it gave us an opportunity to see that some of the Texas scenery, in which they may not have had that opportunity if we had just stayed more center within Big Bend. If you've ever been to the Big Bend National Park, we're going to take you to the other side of Texas today, to East Texas and Southeast Texas area for Big Thicket National Preserve. And it is a much different landscape than what you would find in Big Bend. But I love it as it's my hometown and has quite an interesting history. So I'm going to do just a brief introduction to Big Thicket National Preserve. We've got a video that shares some of the waterway with you all, kind of going on a canoe trip, a makeshift canoe trip virtually. And then Megan Urban is with us today, and she's with this part of the staff at the Big Thicket. So I'll be introducing her later on, and she'll tell us a little bit more about the Big Thicket, and we'll end with a walk through a certain trail, again, a video walkthrough of the Big Thicket. So the interesting part that I always find with Big Thicket is the term thicket is actually used because the woods can be so dense in the abundance of plant growth that you find in the Big Thicket area. So that's why the term thicket is typically used. Now, I'm not a biology person, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the history and also some of the economic impact of the Big Thicket area, because you all know I'm the marketing and business mind. But it is a diverse climate. It has many different ecosystems that Megan may touch on, and you have abundance of plant life and animals and other creatures that explore the thicket. Historically, the Big Thicket woods were actually an ideal hunting spot for various American Indian tribes. And Megan, correct me if I'm wrong, I think there are certain sections of the Big Thicket you can still hunt in today, which is kind of unique compared to other national parks that you would find. Again, this is a national preserve. So there's still working area of the Big Thicket, which is pretty cool and kind of unique. Early European settlers could actually survive off of the Big Thicket in a number of ways, not only the plant life, but again, the hunting areas that were present. But the thicket actually kind of came late into the national park scene as far as a preservation of the thicket. So conservationists worked for a number of years. It was a long process, took several decades before we actually became part of the National Park Service in 1974. So a little of the history that I thought was interesting, R.E. Jackson actually was one of the first people who kind of started working on that preservation aspect of the thicket. And he was a railroad operator who actually worked on pulling lumber really out of that area. So he saw that that resource was disappearing in the Big Thicket, and he wanted to help try to salvage some of that restoration. And that was back in the 1920s. So he started an association to try to drum up some interest and try to help preserve a part of the thicket. And he actually gave personally leased 18,000 acres outside of or around Polk County for this purpose of preservation. Interestingly, the Beaumont Chamber of Commerce actually helped endorse some of these plans, and that's always fun to me because I actually serve on the board of directors for the Chamber of Commerce. So it's interesting when you start seeing these business minds coming together with conservation and then the business community supporting that. Now, part of the reason they were supporting it is because they saw an opportunity for tourism in the area. So as the movement of national parks around the country started, that's really what helped push that interest, at least from what I've read and learned about the history of Big Thicket, that interest in tourism and bringing local economic growth to the area through national sites is really what helped spur that interest and kept that going with the Big Thicket. Later on, so it was back in 1960, so we go from the 1920s when some of that interest first started, all the way through 30s, 40s, 50s, and now 60s before we really actually saw some legislative changes coming into effect that helped start pushing the Big Thicket again into that national park idea. So through this, the associations that worked on the preservation of the Big Thicket did change. So now we have the Big Thicket Association that was a real help in pushing it into a national park or national preserve status. So in 1965, Senator Ralph Yarbrough actually came and toured the Big Thicket and was hosted, I believe, by the Big Thicket Association to come to the area, trying to put pressure into making it a nationally recognized site, and again, pushing it for a national park. Now, Yarbrough went back as a senator and did try to put forward a national park idea, but the first survey team that came to the area decided that even though it was being pushed for a national park, that there were not 5,000 acres that could be tracked that did not have some kind of development. So roads cutting through, which were typically used for logging, farming, subdivisions in certain areas. So they couldn't find a big enough piece of land that would designate it as a national park. So they didn't give up. They actually suggested it be a national monument or have other types of designations. And ultimately, Yarbrough was quoted as saying, "Monuments are for dead things." So he was really still pushing for that national park status or some kind of recreational area and that sort of thing. So in the end, after about 50 years of pushing it to be a national park, it was not established as a national park, but something brand new, which was the National Preserve. So the preserve allows us to maintain all of those functional areas of the park. Like we mentioned earlier, you can fish in certain parts of the park, you can hunt in certain areas, camping. You have different options for camping than you would in some other national parks. So the National Preserve was a new type of designation that still allowed it to be protected, conserved, and then used in the future. It's actually really cool here in Southeast Texas. We have family members who actually lived in the park, or some who maybe still do off the grid a little bit, but we have generations of families who grew up in the Big Thicket. So there was a lot of community work that they had to go through in getting those people on board, because they had to give up some personal land that they thought was personal because they had family who had lived on some property for so long, whether they owned it or not. And then they also had a lot of people who actually donated or helped give some of that family land to be preserved as the Big Thicket. So it has a very delicate balance between that strong history in Southeast Texas, where you have those strong family ties and people who want to maintain that kind of rustic culture in their family, and then also understanding that it's important that we preserve it for generations to come, and being able to have a national designation makes that a little bit easier. So I'm going to invite you to take a canoe trip with me in my hometown or area of the Big Thicket.
get people out into waterways that are their own, waterways that they may not realize are theirs. This is your waterway. This is all of the public's water here. To get them out here, to let them experience that water, to let them do something hopefully that they may not have done before, like canoe and kayak, which may be something that many people are scared to do. So offering free ranger-led, completely provided for canoe trips can really give people opportunity to get out and do something they may not do on their own. And then the idea is we want those people to find something they fall in love with and find a way that they can come out, access, you know, their lands and enjoy anytime. Was a park ranger and all park rangers were park rangers. If that makes sense, what I mean is I didn't know how many facets there were inside the Park Service. I did not know I could be a law enforcement ranger or an interp ranger or an education ranger or an accountant or a facility manager or a water quality guy or a biologist or a resource tech. It is still scientifically undetermined as to why cypress knees exist and what their purpose is. A cypress tree has to drop its seed on the dry ground to be able to reproduce. The seeds won't reproduce just dropping into the water. So she articulated in her mind that the cypress knee exists to create current breaks, to collect debris and kind of build the soil mat, if you will, for the seeds to drop on and then germinate and grow. So yeah, with all that being said, cypress knees is one of the things I like to share with especially kids. I like to say things like, if you guys ever thought scientists had everything figured out, or there's no reason to be a scientist because they've already figured it all out, that's totally wrong. They have barely figured out anything. We are barely scratching the surface of what is and why things are. And cypress knees is a perfect example because science today has no idea why cypress knees exist and why the tree does that. So that's just one of the ways I tell kids, like, you should be totally enthralled by science. We're just scratching the surface.
Okay, I'm not a videographer or an editor, but we had a great time filming that, and so I really appreciate the Big Thicket staff for allowing us to come in and do that. Now I'm trying to find where I can stop sharing that screen. It's not popping up here. There we go. Okay, so through that, you could see a different view than sometimes some of our other national parks that we go to. So the Big Thicket is unique in that they have a great number of waterways that go through the Big Thicket. And it's not only a tourist, but even people here locally, we love going and spending time on the water, kayaking, canoeing. And so it was a great exploration through that, the Big Thicket in that way. That Madonna tree, something that's unique about that tree is we were trying to do some audio over that, but being on the water, it made it a little bit difficult. I don't have all that high-tech equipment. So that tree actually is hollow on the inside, but it still has new growth coming out. So it's an interesting tree in the fact, and Christopher kind of had a tree story in his presentation as well. So the tree theme may be happening with national parks and national preserves. But, you know, it's interesting because it's a hollow tree, but there's still new growth that comes out of it. And how does that work? And then the cypress knees is a phenomenon that Max was talking about as far as, you know, different ways that the trees put up root systems that then are kind of look like knobby knees coming out of the water, but we really don't have a clear understanding of exactly why that is. There's different theories about it and, you know, ideas, but we really don't know why. So now I'm going to turn over to Megan. So let me give her a little introduction here. Megan Urban is the Chief of Interpretation and Education at the Big Thicket National Preserve. Growing up in Los Alamos, New Mexico meant that she was able to visit one national park site regularly. And I'm going to mispronounce this, Megan. Bandelier? You're going to have to.
You got it right?
Oh, Bandelier. Good. Bandelier National Monument, and dreamt of visiting another park that wasn't designated until she was an adult, which was Valles Caldera National Preserve, and had a strong family connection to another park site to be designated the Manhattan Project National Historic Park. So even with all of those opportunities, it wasn't until that she was doing a Student Conversation Association internship at Lake Mead National Recreation Area that she realized she wanted to be a park ranger. So she's now worked at 5 national park sites and the Hoover Dam as part of her 16-year career in helping connect people to their public lands. So Megan, thank you so much for helping me work on this project and this presentation today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was, I guess I'll take the round of applause, and applause to Rebecca. I was so excited to be part of this presentation and also this partnership. You getting kids and students out to public lands is so vital, and I'm really excited to be part of this and to be here at Big Thicket. And I'm going to start sharing my screen so you can kind of see what. Should I share the right screen? Yeah. So so you can kind of see where I'm at, what I do, some of the fun things that I get to do here. And it's a fascinating place. You know, we are in Southeast Texas. When I first applied to move here, I thought, do I really want to move to Southeast Texas? And the longer I've lived here, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Like everybody really should move to Southeast Texas. Probably not, because then we have to share it with everybody. But it is a fantastic place, and it's a fascinating place as well. So yes, Big Thicket National Preserve. We are the first national preserve. We are actually signed into law the same day as Big Cypress. And so we have a friendly rivalry going on as to who actually got signed in first, but I think it was us. But we're such an amazing place to come visit. Now, I'm trying to see how to make it go forward. The presentation. Oh, there we go. Okay, so who am I? Yes, Chief of Interpretation. I actually just started that position within the past couple months. Before that, I was the Community Outreach and Volunteer Program Manager here. This is a lovely picture of me and some interns on our Wear Your Life Jacket to Work Day, where we actually hiked in life jackets in the middle of May, which was very hot. But what we do to get a good social media post, right? And as Rebecca mentioned, you know, I've been doing this kind of work for 16 years, but I kind of casually got into it. You know, I've been here in Big Thicket for 2 years. I've been within the National Park Service for almost 6 years, federal career for almost 8 years, starting at Hoover Dam. But prior to that, I actually worked in an organization that partnered with the National Park Service at Lake Mead for about 5 years. When I was at grad school, I was a student hire up in Alaska. And then I started as an SCA, as a Student Conservation Association. So it's kind of, it's like the federal government, it takes a while to get in there, but once you get stuck in there, I'm going to be here for the rest of my career. Maybe not here at Big Thicket, but at least here within the Park Service. But it's such a fascinating place. Now, Big Thicket, and Rebecca, you stole like 3/4 of my presentation. I'm totally kidding about that. No, I totally, nope, you did a fantastic job. So yeah, so we were established in 1974. Big Thicket is unique. We have over 113,000 acres, but we're spread across 15 different units. So it's not like one chunk of land, but we're kind of spread across 7 counties. And we have 9 land units and 6 river corridors. And actually, when we were established in 1974, we had less land. They actually, within our enabling legislation, wrote that we can add land, and there's certain tracts of land that we kind of have our eye on to keep on adding. So we've been able to add land about, almost 30,000 acres of land over the past almost, 45, 46 years. And we're actually still looking at land, which is just so fascinating. We're still able to find little pieces and parts to really make a whole ecosystem. But it's really fascinating. Since we have 15 different units, we have a lot of gateway communities. A lot of national park sites have 1 or 2 gateway communities, a main area that all their visitors get funneled through. And then, we have hundreds, we have all these little towns across Southeast Texas. I mean, Houston could even be considered a gateway community of Big Thicket, Beaumont for sure, Lake Charles. So we have all this interaction with the local community, and a lot of the local community is very invested in Big Thicket and preserving it, and which is just fascinating. So we kind of stretch from the Neches River in Jefferson and Orange counties, very wet, hot and muggy. I mean, everything's hot and muggy this time of year, but we have a lot of water corridors, and then even all the way up to, we have pine forests. I moved here from northern New Mexico, and I was worried I was not going to be able to hear the wind going through pine trees. And when I need that, I go, I just go about 45 minutes north of the visitor center, and I'm like, oh, I feel like I'm back at home. So it is really fascinating, the park itself. Like Rebecca mentioned, we do have an impact in the local community. We have 29 permanent employees. We right now have, about 35 staff total. We have some seasonal staff right now. And then our annual budget is $2.6 million, which is, it sounds like a lot, but there's other parks that have a lot more, but it works for us. We had just about 309,000 visitors in 2020. So people, even though they were stuck at home, they were able to find a way to come out and visit us. And we don't just count the number of visitors that come through our front door here at the visitor center, but we count them at all of our day use areas. We have roads going through our areas. So we're always figuring out new ways to catch everybody who comes to see us. And we have seen a 145% increase over the past 5 years. Either we're getting a whole lot better at counting people, or just that many more people are coming to see us. I kind of think it's both. Now, we just released a press release about our economic impact in our local communities, which is really, I find fascinating. So, and I just found a typo in my presentation, but those 309,000 visitors spent about $21 million in the local communities. Now, Southeast Texas, we are blessed. We have the oil and gas industry that pumps in like billions of dollars into our economy, but $21 million, that's not just a small chunk of change. That's actually a lot. And, we only have about 30, full-time employees, but that revenue coming in supports, 200 to 250 jobs in the local area. Those are the hotel workers that, people come through. Those are outfitters that help with canoes. And it's really interesting. And, adding that all together, the cumulative benefit to local economy is about $28 million. And we have seen this increase every year as our visitation increases. We did, get questions, did you see a lower visitation because of COVID? And, during COVID, during the stay-at-home orders, our visitor center closed at the end of March of 2020, and we didn't reopen until October 1st. So we were shut down, for 5 months. We still saw a lot of people out on our trails. We didn't close our trails. We didn't say you can't come out on the trails. People were still looking for places to get out, probably get away from their families so they didn't, COVID kill them. But also just a place to find some peace and some quiet. So it's just really fascinating. So we did not see, we are one of, I want to say 15 national park sites that saw an increase over the past year of visitation. So that's actually kind of cool. So why is Big Thicket part of the National Park Service? A lot of people sometimes they're like, oh, you're a state park. And I'm like, no, we're actually like a National Park Service. And when I talk about being part of the National Park Service, people ask me, well, what is the difference? What makes a national park different than a state park? And national parks really have to have a national significance, whether it be historical significance, the American Revolutionary War, Civil War, anything like that, or a national significance of an ecosystem like Yellowstone. And here at Big Thicket, we are kind of at the crossroads of 4 major ecosystems that can convene right here. We get the swampy lands, we get the alligators, we get prickly pear, and we get road runners, from more of the western side. We get, the eastern hardwoods. And we actually historically have had buffalo come through this area. So, we have a little bit of everything. And that's what makes it so unique. We are considered one of the most biologically diverse areas in the United States. And every time we have scientists come out here to study the preserve, they find more stuff. Every time a mushroom specialist comes out, we have over 600 types of mushrooms, and they still keep on finding more and more, which is really just fascinating. It's amazing. And then history, I'll just quickly touch on this, but like so many national park sites, really, we are preserved because a small group of very determined people really stood up and said, this is important. We need to protect this. We need to preserve this. And they really pushed forward, which was just amazing. The picture on the screen is Lance Rozier. One of our units is named after him. We have Geraldine Watson, who also is a really big proponent of the preserve. And it's just amazing to think that, what a small group of people can really do to change the world, and maybe even their just little local world. So it's a really cool history. So what can people do when they come to visit us here at Big Thicket? They can do a lot of things, which is just so fun. You bird watch, you can fish, you can camp, you can hike, you can canoe, you can hunt. So part of the discussion when it was becoming a national park site was, locals still wanted to be able to do what they had been doing on this land for, generations, hunting. There was oil leases already on the land. They wanted to go fishing. They didn't want to just be confined to one trail that they, dare not take a step off of. And so they really thought about it. How can we preserve, but still allow some recreation? Probably one of the reasons why it wasn't turned into a recreation area, those were historically out in the West, big lakes from dams. And so they're like, well, how can we do it differently? So they thought of this preserve model, which is just really fascinating. And since then, a lot of national park sites, we do have a good number of preserves. Also, up in Alaska, there's Denali National Park and Preserve. In the and preserve part, you can still hunt, and that's set aside for Alaska Natives. So we really kind of were trailblazers, which is kind of cool. So a lot of locals, Texas, we don't have much public land. There's a small amount of public land, and when people come in and they say, I hear we can hunt, and I was like, yeah, we have hunting permits. We can give it to you for free, and they're like, wait, that for free? And I'm like, yeah, for free. And they're like, wow, I used to belong to a hunting lease and it costed me thousands of dollars. I'm like, no, you can hunt here for free. So it's that ability to continually connect with our visitors and with our local communities that really makes it unique and special. And it's just, it's really fascinating park to be at. And we are always looking for ways to connect with the next generation. You know, a lot of the park visitors nowadays are getting up in their years, and we need the next generation to come along and become the next generation of rangers and stewards and, you know, educators to bring their family out. So it's a fascinating place. And yeah, I think that's all I have to say about it, at least right now, until I get all the questions. So.
Before we move on, Christopher, I see you have a question.
Go ahead before we move on. I didn't want to interrupt.
Oh, no, that's great. Please go ahead.
Okay. Thanks, Megan. That was great. I had a question a little ways back. What kind of pines grow in Big Thicket?
So our number one pine is the longleaf pine.
That's what I thought.
Yes. We do have other pines like loblolly, but the main number one is the longleaf.
Oh, that's neat. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we're going to take a tour of one of my favorite trails, which is the Pitcher Plant Trail. And something that's unique about this trail, well, let me back up. As Megan was talking about the different generations and the next generation of people coming in to the trail, it's been funny over the years, especially as I've gotten involved in Partners in the Parks and become a little bit more outspoken in our local community about the Big Thicket specifically, and then national parks in general, and the National Park Service. We have some people who say, oh yes, I belong to this association, or I'm involved in the Big Thicket in this way, so that's my park, or that's my preserve. And then we have on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have people who say, we have a national preserve here? I had no idea. The funniest part of that is, even if they think they had no idea the Big Thicket National Preserve was here, they've actually probably walked through it, driven through it, or taken a canoe or a kayak trip through it at some point as they lived here in Southeast Texas. So then I asked them questions about, have you been to this area, or have you driven through this town? And they go, oh yeah, well you actually drove through part of the Big Thicket, or at least it was on one side of the road as you were driving by. So it's been kind of funny to see people's reactions, and then they say, oh, I need to explore that and actually see what I'm driving through next time. Now, the Pitcher Plant Trail that we're going to take a tour of, we hit this really perfectly whenever these ideas of the third Thursdays came up, and I reached out to Megan and we started talking about what this presentation would look like. We were just in time to catch the pitcher plants when they're blooming as a flower. And I took some pictures the day we went out, and we did some filming. And I've actually shown that to a number of friends over the last few months, because most people never catch this particular time of year, which is, I think we went out in March. So early kind of springtime is when the pitcher plant trails are actually a flower. And then you'll see a more mature plant in the video later on. And I've shown that some pictures to friends, and they're amazed, because the certain section that you'll see, it just looks like these kind of light yellow flowers all through this area, and some people have never seen it. So that's one thing that's fun about exploring Big Thicket. As many other parks and areas in the National Park Service, when you go at different points of the year, you see something that's totally different. So now we'll go to the Pitcher Plant Trail.
Welcome guys, my name is Megan Urban. I work here at Big Thicket National Preserve. I'm one of the park rangers, and we are located out at our Pitcher Plant Bog today. Now this is actually a very unique ecosystem here in Big Thicket, because we have our pitcher plants, which is one of the 4 or 5 carnivorous plants that are found in the United States. And we have 4 of them. We don't have the Venus flytrap, but we have the other 4. And so this is such a cool place to see. We have hundreds of pitcher plants out here. And so pitcher plants get their nutrients from digesting insects rather than getting their nutrients from the soil. And that's because the soil in this area is actually very not very nutritious, and so they have to figure out a way to do it different. So today we actually have an old pitcher plant that's kind of died, and I kind of want to show you what it looks like on the inside, because pitcher plants, once they're past their flowering stage, they have a little top that covers their little vessel, I would almost say. And so they have some sweet smelling nectar in there that's smelling to insects, and they get trapped, they go down into it, and because they are hairs that push down, they can't then crawl back out, and then they get digested. And this one looks like it's just a new one. It hasn't popped open yet, which is kind of cool. But at the end of the season, once the pitcher plants are done, you can actually look to see what kind of goodies that pitcher plant had found over the year. Now, normally, because we are a part of the National Park Service, we don't allow people to take any plants or things home, but for educational purposes, I get to pull this one apart for you. So it's kind of cool. Usually you can see either ant bodies left over. This one has a lot of pollen right there. This one looks like it had a good sized beetle that found its way into there. Ooh, that one has a fresh thing in there. See, I didn't even freak out. That's pretty impressive. But as you pull it apart even further down, these are all of the probably old insect pieces and parts left behind that helped give this pitcher plant some food last year. And the cool thing is, as you look through, you can get an idea of what kind of insects that the pitcher plants enjoy. They do not like, actually, mosquitoes have been shown that they can actually have their larvae inside the pitcher plant, and then they can escape back out. So these do not help with our mosquito population, unfortunately. But these are such a cool thing because there's not many places in the United States that you can actually see carnivorous plants. Everybody thinks about the Rocky, Feed Me Seymour, but here you can actually look at them pretty up close and personal, which is kind of cool. And this time of year, it's really pretty when they have all the flowers, the flowers blooming and everything. Which are another type of carnivorous plant. It kind of looks like it's about the size, it's bigger than your thumb actually. These are really healthy. So these are called sundews, which are another carnivorous plant that we have here at Big Thicket. And these plants actually like disturbed soil. So often you'll see them in an area that gets a lot of sunlight, like along pipelines or roads. I actually found them in my backyard, which is kind of cool. And the way that they work is they lay fairly flat on the ground, and then as a little insect comes across it, the petal will actually kind of close on top of that insect, digest it, and then open back up, which is kind of cool. And so right now they are looking very healthy. Usually the sundews that I see are pretty flat to the ground, but you can kind of see that they're really kind of popping out right now. And then they'll have just about an inch long stem coming up from the middle with a little teeny tiny flower. So they're not flowering yet, but they're getting close. Another unique plant that you can find out here in the pitcher plant bog would be our longleaf pines. So if you kind of look out in the middle of the bog and you see a small pine tree that has crazy hair standing up, that is longleaf pine. And these were spread out incredibly far distances, before the timber industry came through here. And so Big Thicket, we have been working on restoring longleaf pines to their natural habitats. And their natural habitat would have included this pitcher plant bog. Now we go out and we plant about 16,000 trees every year through volunteer service days. And then couple of years after we do that, we actually go back to that location and we do a prescribed burn. You know, burning is fire is a natural part of our ecosystem here in Southeast Texas, and it actually helps those little longleafs have a good competition. When they start off, I mean, you know, they're only knee-high to a grasshopper, I would say, and then they need to have a lot of sunshine. But as you look around, you can see there's a lot of shrubbier oaks and yaupon that can really outcompete and outgrow the longleaf, and so it wouldn't be able to survive. So if we go through and if we do a prescribed burn every 5 to 7 years, it really gives the longleaf a chance to make it tall enough to outgrow and outcompete these other, you know, other bushier plants. Now the cool thing is at the very top of the longleaf pine is it's an area that if you don't burn it, it can continue growing. And there's so many other pine needles around it that even if it's a really young pine, if it gets burned, the pines actually cover that, I call it a nubbin, but I know it's not a nubbin, but terminal seed that will help grow it up taller. And it's just so cool to see. And so longleaf pines, I think, look a little like Dr. Seuss trees, especially as they grow up, but they're incredibly important in this ecosystem, and we help just protect it.
And now you've done 2 of my favorite trips in Big Thicket National Preserve with Canoe Trip through the river and then our Pitcher Plant Trail, and at a perfect time at the Pitcher Plant Trail too. So thank you all for your participation today, and we'll open it up to any questions specifically for Megan, because she knows even more about the Big Thicket than I could hope to know. But if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to ask. Christopher.
Megan, did you say that there were 3 out of 4 of the carnivorous species? Because you showed us the pitcher plant and the sundew. Was there a 3rd one?
So we actually have 4 out of the 5.
Oh, wow. All right.
Yeah, so the other 2 are really hard to find. They're called butterworts and bladderworts.
Oh, okay.
And when Rebecca and I and my intern went out, we were looking for the butterworts because I knew they were kind of right along the way. They're teeny tiny like the sundews. And just a couple days later, I found them with another group, and I was like, "Oh, I found them!" And then the bladderworts are more water-based, and so I've actually never been able to find those. So yeah, 4 out of the 5 you can see right here.
Any other questions? And I agree, Christopher, I saw your comment in the chat that the virtual third Thursdays are the best idea. So for anyone who's new on the call, I see a couple of new names to me, but I may just not have caught it in previous sessions. We started this earlier in the year because of being locked down with COVID and not being able to do our typical projects that happen in the summer and then the winter months. So this was a great idea. I don't remember whose original idea it was that said, well, why don't we do a monthly virtual tour of some parks and preserves? And so I'm glad that we've done that. Aaron's asking a question in the chat. How can I best prepare myself to be able to work in places like national preserves and parks? Meaning, how can I make myself an appealing candidate? Megan.
Yeah, that's a great question, Aaron. You know, I tell everybody that you don't, especially for like an interpretive ranger, which is pretty much what I do, you don't need to have a specific degree. You just have to show that you can learn day in, day out. Every time I move to a new national park site, I have to learn the new ecosystem, the new stories, and everything like that. So really, if you have the college education, if you have a bachelor's, that's a great starting off point. You know, I went back for my master's just because I was apparently crazy and I wanted to go back to school for a couple more years. But I wanted some specific education for applications. But Nowadays, you know, I always tell people who are interested in becoming national park, you know, within the National Park Service or, you know, state parks or local parks, you know, volunteering is a great way to start out. You kind of get to know the lay of the land. You can kind of see the pieces and parts. Also doing internships, you know, not everybody can afford to do an internship, you know, they're not usually paid that well, but it is a great way to start and kind of expand your boundaries. You know, you can go do an internship in a completely different state and kind of see that. We also have seasonal jobs. You know, every summer, I think, gosh, our workforce goes from like 20,000 employees up to 40,000 employees. We do a lot of hiring. And so start looking at usajobs.gov and just kind of see what kind of jobs are available. I do tell people that if they want to work at Grand Canyon, you might have to wait a while because everybody wants to work at Grand Canyon or Yellowstone. But there are 423 National Park Service sites in every single park. You know, they often either hire seasonals or interns. You know, there's a lot of smaller parks that are simply fascinating. I visited 151 national park sites so far, and some of my favorite ones are the smallest ones. So don't limit yourself just to the big fancy names. I'm here at Big Thicket and I just love it. So
perfect. Thank you, Megan. With that, I'm going to spin it off to how can someone prepare themselves for hiking in the Big Thicket, especially in the summertime, because we tend to get pretty hot here in Southeast Texas and humid. So what would you recommend someone bring with them if they're going to come hiking between, especially June through August, but I know May and even into September sometimes can be pretty warm?
You know, I would say your best bet is to get up as early as the birds rise, get going, maybe skip most of the heat if you can. But, you know, bring lots of water. It might not feel like you're getting dehydrated. You just feel like you're getting even more and more sweaty. But since it is so humid here, you don't have the evaporative cooling you might have out in the West. I came from the West. I'm still figuring this all out. But definitely drink lots of water, bring salty snacks. Invest in some really, really good mosquito spray, or just run the trails. You know, as long as you're moving fast enough, they can't land on you. You should be good. But if you want to take your time, you know, get some really good bug spray on because that helps. And then of course, once you get done with your hike, we always encourage people to do a tick check and, you know, make sure you don't take anything back home with you. So.
Perfect. Thank you. And then Angela left a question in the comment section. What is your favorite park or preserve?
That question is so hard. It's like asking which kid I like the best. And there's sometimes I like one kid or the other.
Everyone has a favorite.
Yes, exactly. I don't have a favorite. Just a favorite moment. I would say I have a top 5 list, and it's top 5 of parks that I've been to combined with parks that I would love to work at. One of my top ones is the Valles Caldera in New Mexico. And, you know, I grew up, I don't know if anybody's ever been to New Mexico, but it's this beautiful ancient volcano, and the caldera itself is 11 to 12 miles wide. And it was privately owned for pretty much my entire life. And so nobody could ever go explore it. And it became part of the National Park Service. And I mean, I've driven past it so many times. So I finally got to go and explore, and I was like, oh, it is what I thought it was. So Valles Caldera is definitely one of my top 5. I love Great Sand Dunes in Colorado, and the interplay between the dunes and the Sangre de Cristos and the Big Valley is just also amazing. I spent many of summers up in Michigan, so I love Sleeping Bear Dunes. Again, apparently I like sand for not living close to sand. I love Sleeping Bear Dunes. It's just a really beautiful place. Sunset Crater, which is just right outside of Flagstaff. You know, these are one of the smaller parks that not a lot of people hear about. It's just that area with Sunset Crater in Wapaki is just amazingly beautiful, and the stories that they tell. And then I just got done doing a 17 national park site visits over the past, you know, it was 2 weeks ago. And Great Smokies is just fantastic. But I went to this amazing interpretive center based in, not at Shiloh National Military Park, but it's called Corinth, and it's a small town just south of Shiloh. And that interpretive center just blew my mind, and it really impressed me. And Freedom Writers was just amazing. It's like one mural, but my whole family took 45 minutes to read every single panel. And I have a 9 and 12-year-old. And when I have my 9 and 12-year-old actually standing and reading about something, it makes me realize this is a good spot. So I know I gave you more than one and probably more than 5, but I just love going to these places, and finding those small ones that really make my heart happy is kind of fun.
I feel like these monthly check-ins are a chance for all of us to nerd out a little bit on our love for the National Park Service and the different sites that they help conserve. So it's always fun to see someone else's enthusiasm for them. And even though we sometimes have our favorite spot, you know, whether it's a local one like Crater Lake for Christopher or Acadia, I don't know if that's Kathleen's favorite, but it seems like she goes there quite a bit. So we all have, you know, one that draws us in, but then we always love exploring and listening to other stories about other sites too. So that's always fun.
Yep.
I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I'll look to Melissa and Christina if there's anything we need to do to wrap it up, but I want to be able to get us out on time at 3 o'clock, or 3 for me, 4 for other people, and what, 1 for Christopher. So all right, well, thank you all for joining us, and thank you again to Megan and all of the staff at the Big Thicket. I jokingly said, you know, I don't know if I got the right video. We probably need to go back and film maybe 3, 4, 5 other times, just you know, just to have fun out in nature. So thank y'all for taking the time to walk with me and tell us, being able to catch all those photos and video, and then to be with us today. Thank you, Megan.
Of course, and we are so happy to be part of this. And anytime we get a chance to kind of highlight how awesome Big Thicket is, it's awesome. It's so much fun.
Good deal. Thank you. All right, everybody. I hope y'all have a great rest of the day and a good weekend.
Thank you.